Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. We're just some middle-aged guys talking sports. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and also like our YouTube channel, and listen on Spotify or Anchor or wherever you get your podcast. So today, we're going to kind of wrap up some baseball talk. I think this might be the last of the baseball for this season. By talking about the comparison of the baseball game from then and now. We're talking about back in the day, which for us is 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're not going to go back too much further than that probably, versus today's baseball game. So who wants to get started here? Matt, why don't you start us out? What do you got in some comparison between the game now and the game then?
Well, just some of the things I wrote down were, also I'm all over the map here, but, obviously innings pitched, from a pitching standpoint is a huge thing now. Nobody counted innings. I mean, they did,
right,
obviously, but it wasn't a pitch count, I guess is what I'm saying.
Pitch count,
pitch count as much as innings pitched or whatever. But it wasn't like, okay, I'm starting pitchers at 90 or 100. Okay, he's done no matter how he's doing or whatever, no matter what inning it is. Complete games, I think actually I looked up so at one point, complete games for back in the day were way higher, obviously, than they were now. I mean, I remember Halladay would pitch a complete game, or Cliff Lee or whatever, but for the most part, complete games are a non-factor these days.
I was going to say, here's a great example.
Yeah.
Our number one pitcher, Aaron Nola,
has
never pitched in the ninth inning.
Ever?
Nope.
Ever.
That's what as a pro.
Well, yeah, I'm saying ever.
That's what they just mentioned that because they had a seventh game, 7-inning, doubleheader.
Yeah.
So he pitched to the seventh, and they were, they were comparing if that's a complete game. They said, well, even so, he goes, he's never pitched in the ninth inning, is what they said, which is shocking,
the pitch count and all that. I mean, I don't want to discount that, but sometimes they're head scratchers.
Yeah.
Why are you pulling this pitcher who's hot, who's doing well, when they only have one more inning to get through, let's say, and that inning might be 10 or 20 pitches. You're going to tell me 10 or 20 pitches are going to throw this guy's arm off for the whole rest of the season or something? I'm not buying it, and I get that the advancements in technology and so on, but I also get the advancements in modern medicine makes it so that guys that used to not be able to pitch anymore because they sustained an injury can now come back and pitch again. And all the advancements in science, you would think in some ways would make it that they could pitch more innings, more pitches. So that to me, that some of that is, it takes some of the and I'll probably talk about this a lot, the gut out of that, the management out of that, from a manager's knowledge and the eye test to say, my pitcher is going out again because he's pitching great and he's only got one more inning. Or if I can get one more inning out of him, then I only got to bring a guy in for the ninth.
Or at least send him out there. And then if he struggles, then you can go to the bullpen. Not like, okay, we're just going to the bullpen.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was going to just so piggyback on that.
Yeah.
A big difference with pitching is also your specialty pitchers. Your lefty especially. A guy might come in and pitch against one guy. And he's your specialty lefty guy. And the other thing I always find very interesting, and we talked about this earlier, especially in a shortened season as it is this year with baseball, how a guy can pitch one game as a reliever, and then he can't pitch another game, the next game,
Well, and didn't it happen once recently or whatever? Like somebody warmed up.
Yes,
they warmed up. Didn't even come in the ball game, and they're okay. Well,
not available.
He's done for not available for the doubleheader.
Yeah. Well, and this season's a perfect example of some of those things like pitch counts. Listen, the season is so much shorter. Why is the pitch count that important this year? But they're still following the same rules, I'll say it, of pitch counts, when this year, there's 100 less games. Yeah. So there is, far less stress and strain on the pitcher when you're not pitching all of those games as they're, as going to be available.
Right. The one thing I was going to say, the only thing I'm going to, guess is, because I wrote this down as, a big difference today is you're having, the speed of the pitch, a lot of these pitchers. You're gotten guys that are pitching up to 100 miles an hour. I don't know, our last episode we talked about the 80 Phillies. how fast did Carlton even pitch? I don't even know like what was his top pitch. Like
But
how
it was-
fast was
it-
that? You know, like
Yeah, there are definitely guys today that are pitching far faster than they ever
so I'm
did
assuming
back in the day.
the more wear and tear because of speed. I'm guessing.
I would guess on
Well,
that.
but
Yeah.
I mean, the question, I mean, it's probably modern science and whatever else. How are these guys getting to be that much faster, knowing that they're not juicing and stuff? Which some of those guys back in the day were. Read Tug McGraw's book. You know, the book about he you know, those guys were on amphetamines and all kinds of things, and it was all legal at the time, so there wasn't anything illegal going on there. But they weren't throwing the ball nearly as fast. The velocity was not there with these pitchers like it is today. I mean, it's regular every day. Guys pitching 95, 96, 97 miles an hour every single. And you're not talking about just some specialty reliever who comes in who's got super heat that he just in the ninth inning he's going to mow you down with. 100-mile fastballs.
No, your fastball's not in the 90s. You're not.
Right.
I mean,
Or forget
not a
about it.
fastball.
Unless you're Jamie Moore and
Yeah.
your fastball was 87 and
Well-
your changeup was 72 or something.
Well, the one thing I was going to say, I'll bring up since we're just talking about pitchers, that they were saying how, like, our nemesis of the Braves back, years ago, all those pitchers that were great,
Oh, yeah.
they weren't power
No,
fast
no
pitchers.
power
Like what
arms.
they were saying, what would they be like in today's game?
Yeah,
Well,
good
would they be who they are? But they were saying how they paint it. Our best pitcher is not a power guy. So
I mean, I think a good pitcher is if they can control the ball, and so much of pitching is the mental game. Mentally going up there and because once you're there, then you can put the ball where you want it to be. If you're not, so I think some of those guys, a good pitcher is probably going to stand the test of time for those reasons, and because they didn't back then just come out and throw heat.
Yeah, no, and keeping the hitter off balance, I think,
Right.
and which I mean, that's huge. But you have anything else?
well, I was going to say, for me, once
That's
you
it.
want to.
Well, I mean, one of the things I put down, and this is like really going back because this goes back to I think the early '70s when the designated hitter came in, and thinking about that, and obviously putting things in place this year with designated hitter. And I'm just going to say, for the record, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I wish they would get rid of it completely instead of expanding it. Because to me, if you're a baseball player, you're playing both sides of the game. And to have a designated hitter takes that out, and I get that they did that probably to make the game more interesting because, again, people love the home run hit, and I do too. But I'm sorry, like baseball, every baseball player should be able to get up there and hit. And I don't think it's right for the game. It's just I don't know. I'm not a fan of it.
Well, I think it's a big when it not this year. That's a big difference with NL and AL managers is how you manage your pitcher's spot, and when you think about how they have to manage that spot,
Double switches and
double
things like
switches
that.
exactly, and all those, and the amount of people they may have to use because they don't have a DH.
Oh, and you think about it, those star the pitchers, they had to hit in high school and maybe even
A lot of
college
them probably
or whatever.
were probably
but-
the better hitters.
Yeah, right. So it's not like they couldn't hit. Like all of a sudden, it's like okay, we don't have to be a good hitter or whatever. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Matt.
Yeah, and I mean you're right with the differences in the American League because your rosters look different. I always felt like, for whatever it's worth, when you get to the World Series, the opposing team, because we're always, the Phillies, when they go up against whoever, they have a guy who they specifically got, or guys they got to be designated hitters, where we would just throw in some schlub sometimes, like, you wouldn't have that guy as your designated hitter, but they could go out and recruit a guy whose knees are blown or whatever the case may be because you want him to go up and hit home runs. So, not a fan.
Well, I think that kind of brings me to one of mine I wrote down is interleague play. When we grew up. When we grew up, there was no interleague play. You played in the Midsummer Classic, the All-Star game, and then you played in the World Series. You didn't play anybody. Like even though we were how many miles from New York, the Yankees, we never played them.
Baltimore.
Yeah, exactly. So and I think that when we talk about having designated hitter, that makes a big difference if you're playing in their park, and they're not playing in our park.
Well, and something along those lines that I had written down is, the difference between now and then is now it's 3 divisions, expanded play, division series. There's no such thing as a division series. I mean, really, like we talked about in our last episode, we talked about, the 79 Phillies. I think they were pretty good, but they didn't even make the playoffs or whatever because, there was
Less
only
people.
2 division winners or whatever.
Right.
So, I think to me, that's like, I like the excitement of, your team can be in it maybe towards the end more, the postseason races and that type of stuff. But
wild card game.
games and all that stuff and everything. But it's just like, it's I don't know.
See,
I'm old school.
I like that. I think that adds another element, and adds another element to to teams who might not have otherwise been in it.
Right.
Who and that affects everything, because if you're not in it at some point, you might be a seller trying to get rid of guys, and then guys that are buyers that are looking. So it has impact all over the game.
Oh, yeah.
But I like that there's the ability for teams to still late in the season. Who it gives some excitement there, and being that we've had plenty of teams who have not been up there in the top, I like that. So I think it adds to that.
Well, I was gonna say, and also with the September call-ups, that makes a change for those teams that if you're trying to win something, you're gonna have the call-ups, but they're not gonna be playing. Where the other guys, they might be playing a whole bunch of new guys. So let me see something. Obviously one of the big things difference, the shift. That is obviously very, very different. Again, that's just something, I guess, and we can talk about analytics.
Analytics, that's it.
But with the shift, some people hate it, but again, it's almost like somebody thought about. Well, hey, they never hit over there.
Yeah,
that's just why are we putting all these people in their positions? So I don't know if you think about the shift.
It's the shift. I would say I don't like it per se, but it's smart defense, and so. In my mind, the hitters should adjust to that, and then it wouldn't happen. But that's also easier to say, because we all know one of the hardest thing to do in sports, maybe the hardest thing, is to hit a baseball. Yeah. So it's easy for me to sit behind the table and say, well, that guy should hit it over there. Right. It's much harder to do. So it's a smart move, and I appreciate that part of it. It's frustrating in some ways, so I can't say I hate it though.
I almost think like they ought to come up with a rule, almost like a legal defense in the NBA. Like hey, you can shift, but you can only shift this much. You can't put your entire whatever on this side of the field or whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean you would think, and I don't understand if you're. When you have a runner on third and they have a shift on, like you would think there'd be more stealing.
Well, but that brings you to the analytics, which is all of that, and so there's a part of me that likes analytics from the standpoint of like if I'm the coach, I like that you can tell me statistically this and that and the other, and that helps me with some things. And I think that can be a good thing. And I think that, again, from the management standpoint, understanding that, and from if you're the pitchers and the pitching coach, hey, this guy, we have all the analytics on the batters, you study up, and that helps you. It gives you an edge if you're willing to sacrifice the time to study up on those things. But then there's that part that I mentioned a little bit ago of the gut feel of the game that I think has been lost in some ways, because people are letting analytics, like if that was all there was to it, you could put a computer in the dugout. Yeah. And it could call the game for you. Well, it's not. I mean, there's such a thing as, guys that are hot that day or guys that are just feeling it that day. And when you take a pitcher, for example, or you take a batter out because statistically it's the right thing, righty, lefty, whatever the case may be, sometimes it's a head scratcher to me, because I think that doesn't make any sense in this game.
Right. Well, I was going to say, and that really starts to skew a lot of numbers and statistics from, past years to now. It's going to be very different. I mean, you look at Jacob deGrom. He's a great pitcher. He doesn't have the wins and things, but so now they're not even looking at wins, and just because of
looking at whip and things like that.
Well, the thing about wins, and I want you to chime in there, Matt. The thing about wins that I've always had an argument with is the pitcher only controls 50% of that equation. Right. If your team can't put some runs on the board, this happened how many years with the Phillies have I said, and we've said, well, listen, it doesn't matter. If they didn't score, if you can't score more than one, you're never going to win a game. So it doesn't matter if the other team lets up, whatever. If you can't score more than one run, you can't win the game. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, pitchers' win totals or whatever are great. I mean, we talked about that in the previous podcast or whatever. But yeah, I agree that they can't control. The pitcher can only control what he can control, and that's it. But you mentioned about stats, like something I had written down, is just the difference in, back in the day you looked at batting average, home runs, RBIs, whatever. Now you're looking at whip. For pitchers, you're looking at OPS, WAR. Right, you're looking at wins above replacement and things like that. Those things never existed back in the day or whatever. So I think that helps, but it also is like, again, like you said, it's a gut thing. You look like, you remember the scenes in Moneyball where, it's like, we're going to do this because we need to get on base to get guys in to score or whatever. Whereas, old style guys were like, hey, this is the guy, we're hot, I don't care that this guy is better against this pitcher or whatever. This guy has
playing.
a 16-game hitting streak. I'm keeping him in. That type of thing, So
Well, and that interesting, and obviously that's a movie, but they constructed that team in a particular way to do that because they didn't have any money.
Right.
And other teams, like the Yankees, are never going to do that because they got the deepest pockets around. So, but there's gobs and gobs of data.
Yeah.
That's out there now and that they collect, and you can do a lot of the good things with it, but I don't think you can do everything.
Another thing with the whole part we're talking about here is launch angle.
Oh.
One of our players on the Phillies, I think, got really hurt by doing our first baseman who's now hurt.
Hoskins.
Yes, Hoskins. That
season.
he was a great hitter coming up through the minors, and when he first started, and then they changed how he hit, basically, so he could.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I know that.
And that's supposedly why he's getting better now. Is that he tried going back to what he used to do. But yeah, I think everybody wants the long ball, and so they want to hit it a certain direction. I think that's another part of all these. When you look at statistics, they start looking at.
Well, that's a different. Home runs definitely are. There are a lot more home runs. Today, and there's a lot of good reason for that too. But that, the launch angle, all that kind of thing. I think when I think about a big change in the game, I think just money, and how much money is involved and how that drives things with television contracts and all those kinds of things. Because, I love that the games are on TV. I love when when it's spring training time. I like that I can watch some spring training baseball, especially like the year after they won the World Series. I wanted to, I was itching for some Phillies, and that was great. But there's a part of me that this is going to come off bad to some people, I think. But this season, with the shortened season and less games, there's some excitement there that I kind of like of a shorter season with things.
Every game counts more.
Yeah, every single game counts more. And it doesn't give you time for all those things over the course of a long season. Like, hey, you got to go work it out in the minors for a couple weeks and come back. There is no time for any of that. Right. But part of me kind of likes that because, like you said, every game matters more, and that's how football survives. And is such a not just survives but thrives. Yeah. Is that every game matters. In baseball, you can go on a pretty big losing streak. And depending on the time of the year, it doesn't impact you that whole much.
Last year was a great example. The Washington Nationals, if they played their first 60, like we are playing 60 games, they were awful. And now they're the World Series champs, And going back to when you mentioned the early part about money and teams, I think I don't know what it was like way back, as far as finances go, but especially now. I mean, it's such a disparity, since there's no cap. How much money. And I just looked, and I find it very interesting. One of the best teams in all of Major League Baseball is the Tampa Bay Rays, and their payroll is super low. And then one of the highest paying teams is awful, and that's Boston. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you have the money you can win.
Right. But the money drives so much of all of this stuff that happens, and decisions. They're never going to reduce the number of games. They're never going to decrease things. It's always going to be more and more and more. There wasn't. These teams had their own cable network, and every game and all of the everything that's on television and all that happened. That didn't exist. I mean, there were a lot of games, if I remember correctly, weren't even on TV, and there were teams that didn't have lights, so they didn't have any night games. Yeah. They only had day games, and.
I was going to say, back in the day, it was game of the week on whatever, and it was this week in baseball and whatever. It wasn't, everything was not, I mean, that's just society in general, but, everything's on TV all the time or online or whatever. So a couple other things I had written down. There were more style type things.
Go ahead. I got some,
batting stances.
I wrote
back in the day or whatever, there's no Joe Morgans, there's no Willie Stargels, there's no Gary Maddox with the wide bat. There are some unique ones, but it's pretty much vanilla as far as batting stances now. What are you going to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, we think of Pete Rose and how he crunched down, and then with batting stances also choking up on the bat. Well, they'll talk about it once in a while how they'll say, "Oh, he choked up," and he when he got that hit.
Pete Rose talked about that. He was on I don't know, guest commenting something. This was a couple years ago on, I forget what it was, but it's between games and he's talking. He was saying, well, if the guy did this, I would do this. If the pitcher did this, I was doing this, and he adjusted his batting stance and all that based on what was happening with the pitcher. And I don't think, you just don't see that kind of stuff.
Well, and back in the day, it was a contact game. It's put the ball in play and see make them field it. Nowadays it's home run or strikeout. Power or nothing. I mean, the strikeouts are way up the home runs.
That's what I was going to say. That bringing that up. I was just going to say, way up on strikeouts because of the way up on home runs.
Which I think is one of the complaints about maybe younger people in baseball is it's boring because if it's not a home run, it's a strikeout. At least if the ball is in play, there's action going on. Like if you go to an actual in-person game, I know people can't right now, but when you could or whatever. So.
Well, there's some other minor things I wrote down that just were relatively new, like the no pitch intentional walk, which just came up, which it's just an interesting tidbit, and I don't know, like there's pros and cons to that. I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me is like, get it over with, let them go. Right. But there's also been times where you'd be, where you might think you're going to intentionally walk somebody, something happens, and the next thing you know, it changes things.
Or just make a bad intentional throw.
Make a pass ball or something.
Yeah, so, just an interesting rule that's come up in the last couple of years.
I was going to say, I look at equipment, the batting helmet. You look again. We'll say Pete Rose again. He had, there was his helmet. Yeah. Now it's the ear. Now it's also the ear into the mouth, and then exactly arm guards and foot guards and
so you don't foul off
exactly. I mean, all of that. And with that, with equipment, a lot of times they have to adjust, with their more often, I think, than what they used to do.
Batters stepping out, pitchers not working as fast. I wrote that down.
Right. Well, I think the advancement in helmets is really a positive thing for baseball, and you see that. All the little arm and elbow guards and all that stuff, I think probably 50% of those guys don't need any of that stuff.
And the sliding mitt that looks like an oven mitt.
Yeah.
Well, and Barry Bonds standing in there pretty much hit me if I'm not
Chase Utley.
We talked about that briefly in another previous project. And Chase Utley was just standing there, and he'd take it, and he'd trot on up to the base, and that was it. He got hit more than anybody. Some of that stuff is, little lack of toughness in the younger kids, maybe.
And something else I had written down was just the difference in venues, right? So back in the day, it was the all-purpose Three Rivers Stadium, the Vet, Riverfront Stadium, all-purpose stadium. Now it's baseball ballparks like Citizens Bank Park or whatever. And all. I mean, to me, I like the beauty of the baseball ballpark and the grass or whatever. I loved watching back in the day some balls that were you hit hard into the turf, take a huge hop and one more hop and it's a single or whatever. But I mean that doesn't happen anymore. But I like the speed game in that element, but I'll take the grass and the nice ballparks over the all-purpose stadiums.
Definitely.
Well, I mean the grass fields now are like that. A lot of the ballparks are built to harken back to the old parks.
So way
Camden Yards, places like that were built to harken back to the old ones. And to me, natural grass field, real grass is baseball.
Right. Yeah.
And I think they tried to serve two masters at a time where there wasn't as much money in sports.
Right.
Now there's so much money in sports that you can do that. At the time, it made economic sense to do that, and there was always a little bit. Each sport got the short end in some ways, depending on where it was.
Right. Another thing I wrote down is stealing. I think it's a way it's a different game now. Way less amount of steals being done than what it used to be. Manufacturing runs is different today than what it was back then. I mean, there is no more Ricky Henderson.
There's no more get him on, get him over, get him in.
Well, and it goes to the same with bunting. There's just it's a lost art almost. You don't see it very often with it. There's the get him in, get him over. All that. That's not.
Well, I think it's interesting. Again, I don't know if Major League Baseball is going to do anything about this next year, but because of how things are this year, when you go in extra innings, they're putting somebody on second base, which I'm finding it's very interesting because you're almost going back to that. Do I bunt this guy over? Right. Which again, you didn't really do that. You haven't done that lately, or you sack the sacrifice because they can. Okay, I'm only going to get one out. I'm guaranteed he's going to go get the third, and
Well, that's interesting. You brought that up because part of me likes the runner on second in extras, and then a part of me goes, I like the game that went till 2 a.m, 15 innings, and you'd play some position player would be out there pitching for the last couple innings, and it got crazy, and that crazy part was always kind of fun to watch and interesting. But you're right about the runner on second brings a whole new logistic to the coaching and that has to go on there. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Matt?
I'm just old school. I mean, if I'm the pitcher, I'm coming in. Hey, I got a guy on second. What? I got to start the inning with a guy on second or whatever, because it's not a guy on first or whatever. But if you're a pitcher, you can look over. He's behind. I mean, I know that pitchers are how to check that and everything now. But I'd much rather have a 25 inning game than have some guy on second at the beginning of the 10th inning.
Right.
And I don't think the 7-inning doubleheader.
No, I don't think it's going to stay. I just meant
although minor leagues have been doing that for many years, and I found that to be kind of fun and interesting. Mostly fun and interesting because the Phillies bullpen stinks. Right. So with 7 innings, you don't have to get into the bullpen very much. So I've been grateful for some doubleheaders this year with not having to get into that awful bullpen.
Right. Another thing I wrote down was less physicality. With sliding,
yes.
Think of we talked about our guy Chase Utley, sliding into second, and especially the sliding into the home plate thing is very different. I don't know what you guys think about. Like
back in the day, Pete Rose taking out Fosse or whatever, home plate in an All-Star game. I mean, geez, that would never happen today.
Well, I mean, I think they went too far with those rules. I get protecting the catcher, and I understand that, but I think they went a little bit too far with that to the side of protecting him too much. Right. There's got to be a happy middle ground there, I think, with things, because I think
well, especially because they could replay it. If the one team could replay, well, if he didn't score, I'm going to replay it because was he blocking the wrong way? That's the other part.
Did the throw take him into the path of the runner?
Right.
And that type of thing.
Well, that brings up a whole other part of the game today, which is replay, and how much that impacts things and how much that can change things. Although, I continue to be, as much as you complain about the umps and all this kind of stuff, it's incredible to me how many of those they get right. Yeah. Because those things are happening bang, bang, like within a blink of an eye. We're watching it at super slow motion, and most of the time they get it right. Yeah. But I think that has changed the game, and I don't know if it's for the better. Although, you want the right call to be made, but sometimes I think, how many angles are we looking at this thing at, and how much is that changing what's happening here? Right. And that seems commonplace to us now because it's everywhere. Yeah. But, back in 1980, there was no replay.
No. I'm through my list.
The only thing I just wrote is, again, silly. We talk about like the uniforms, like how there always used to be. You had one home, one away, boom. Yeah. Now it's a day game, and like the Phillies, besides day game, they have the Throwback Thursday. So now they're bringing back, the powder blues. Right. So I think that's interesting. I think obviously it's a marketing thing, so you can sell more, more jerseys.
And that goes to the whole machine of marketing and money that's there. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier, because you can buy all of these, and now that's all the different jerseys. They're going to make some money, and they when you're paying these guys all this money, you need all that. So
with guaranteed contracts.
Yeah. Right. Now I will tell you, I love that because I love watching the baby blues. I love the older uniforms. I wish they'd go back. I wish everyone would go back to most of them. Right. There's a few out there in the league that are kind of bad, but that's fun to see. I don't know how fun it is for younger people to see it. For me, it's neat to see, and I love seeing the Phillies wear the powder blues, the baby blues.
Well, because unfortunately, that's the other thing. But I think they're changing. They have to change the game to make it a little, more fast moving because of the younger people, or it's not watching as much as what we like watching.
Well, and you can only make baseball so fast.
Right.
You can only make it so fast. If you want to appeal to the younger audience and stuff, there is a case to be made for the 7-inning game or things like that to make it a shorter game. Not that I want that, but I think, maybe 10, 20 years from now, that's where they would go, because baseball, they say it's America's pastime, and it is more, I don't say it's not a sport, because it's absolutely a sport, but it's more pastime. You go to a ball game, it's an event, you're there, you do the whole thing, and it's just different than some other sports. There's that Americana, there's that old school feel that I think most people that go to the ballpark enjoy. Right. So I think there you have it, gang. There's our comparison. You decide for yourself if you like old school or new school or a little bit of each like we kind of do. You've been listening to and watching the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. We'll see you next time. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and listen to us wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time.